All right, I'm live. Hello, hello, beautiful people. If you're watching me on the replay, thank you for watching me. I just need to free up some space really quick. Um, go live. All right, Instagram's live. Um, and then let me see, 0428. Okay. Um, okay. So can you guys hear me okay? Um, I am streaming live on, I know TikTok can hear me. I'm on my mic. So let me know if you can hear me on the mic. Oh, let me write what we're talking about really quick. Are, do you have control over your emotions? Yes. Okay, good. All right. All right. So we're talking about emotions today. All right. I'm here. We are talking about emotions today, and my name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. So if you are just scrolling in or have never came into my live before, I talk about mental health, and I talk about it in ways that are digestible, where I help you kind of shift the way you think, because a lot of times we get stuck in this cycle, and we feel like we can't get out. And so my goal is to help people and educate them on the things that so many people go through. I've been doing this for, I've been in the mental health field for over 20 years. So I get to work with so many people. And over the years, I've come to understand that life, it's not as hard as we make it because we don't have the tools to deal with the circumstances that come. So it gets challenging, believe me, but I think it gets even more challenging because we weren't taught how to deal with certain circumstances. Um, and one of those huge circumstances that I talk about a lot is emotions. My emotion chart just fell. Hold on, let me show you. Like, I'm so huge on emotions. Like, I keep this thing every time I speak or go somewhere. Um, Emotions are huge. It's something that we talk about in my house a lot, with my clients, anybody I work with. We're going to talk about emotions. Like, we just can't get around emotions. And if you watch or listen to this broadcast, you're going to understand why it's so important. So I love educating. I love teaching. So I just want, and I'm a very visual learner. So I just want to, when it comes to feelings and emotions, because I think sometimes we can get them confused. And for people that are listening and not watching, I have a thing up that says, what's the difference of feelings and emotions? And it says a fundamental difference between feelings and emotions is that feelings are experienced consciously, while emotions manifest either consciously or subconsciously. So, when I think about the fact that our emotions can experience subconsciously, that can feel scary because there are so many emotions that we go through that go unnoticed, they go unchecked. A lot of times people don't realize they're struggling with emotions because they weren't taught. So I just want to put things into perspective for you, for people that may not realize that, because a lot of times your life may be going at the pace of your emotions and you don't realize it. A lot of times your response or the things that you're choosing to do or not do is because of the emotions that you're experiencing. So let's say growing up, things happen. Grief, it could be something subtle or something that was really big, right? And you experienced an emotion. And a lot of times, like, our parents or caregivers, they weren't taught emotions. So this is not about blaming anybody or saying it's somebody's fault. But a lot of times they weren't taught, they were in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you don't have time to think about emotions. I always use an example of like people that go to war and they're on the battlefield. I was in the military, so I like using this example. They're on the battlefield, they don't and they lose their battle buddy, and they got to keep going. They don't have time to think about what just happened or how they're feeling, right? They have to keep going. And a lot of times when they get back home and now the dust has settled, now all of this stuff is coming up. And so, like, for instance, let's say a motorcycle comes by and it kicks off and they get really scared. In the moment, they're not in any danger. Like, there's no danger with the motorcycle. But because subconsciously that noise mimics the noise from when they were in war, they immediately get scared. Like, literally, that's what happens with us. Even though you've never been in war, the things that you've gone through that you never dealt with or nobody ever talked about. Let's say you lost a loved one, you lost a parent, a grandma, and the funeral happened and nobody talked about it. You'll be surprised at how much struggles you may have with the anxiety or grief around dying. Let's say you witness something traumatic. It's so many times when I'm working with people and they share their story and they talk about it as if they were reading a book, and I hear it and I'm like, wow, that was a lot. And they're like, really? Like, because it was their story, they don't think about it that deeply. They don't recognize the emotions that were happening during that time because they never had time to recognize it. They were never taught. Nobody ever sat down with them and said, hey, like, how are you feeling? So that you can pause. I remember when the pandemic happened and one of my sons, I have 4 kids in 4 different schools. So juggling that was like a nightmare. But one of the principals called and he was like updating me on things. And then, I can tell like on the phone, he sounded stressed. And I said, after he finished telling me the deal, whatever, I said, how are you doing? And he took a deep breath. It's like he wanted to cry. Like he was like, I'm hanging in there. Like you can tell he got really, really emotional because, a lot of times we'll say, hi, how are you? Right. Especially in America, hi, how are you? People say, fine, thank you. We're not really fine. Right. And when somebody actually sits and says like, how are you really doing? And you've seen the commercials or things and people sit and they take a deep breath and they're like, dang, like they can feel it because they haven't made time to feel or think about what they're doing or how they're feeling. So when it comes to emotions, there's such a huge factor in how we're feeling and how we're framing things, right? And so a lot of times, some of the things that you're trying to do, the goals you're trying to set, you'll feel a fear, some anxiety that may come up. And you don't realize if you were to just tap in, like doing these lives, I started doing these lives like almost 10 years ago. And I stayed focused on the goal of like wanting to teach people about mental health. And so like the idea of what I wanted to do, I held on to that. But I had the emotion of fear. I'm like, what am I going to say? Who's going to watch? Blah, blah, blah. Like I had all of these thoughts, but I tapped into those thoughts, right? I tapped into those feelings because the thing about feelings and emotions, they're for a moment. They don't last forever. That same emotion that you feel when you're having a hard time, it's a moment that you're experiencing. It's not your life. That's one thing I tell people when I'm working with them is that when you're struggling, like remind your mind, because if you don't remind your mind, it's a moment. Like you have to really be the architect of your mind. And if you don't remind your mind that this is a moment you're experiencing, this is not your life, you'll be making decisions off of that emotion. And there's a lot of people that, when I work with them and they're struggling with trying to stop a behavior or something, and I'll say, like, let's just use food, for example. And they realize we come to the conclusion that, okay, I binge eat when I'm struggling, when I'm emotionally struggling, I find myself binge eating. And so it's not that, so it's hard to like stop a behavior right away overnight. And so instead of just grabbing whatever it is and binge eating, I talk to people and I say, all right, so and you may still want to like get that cookie or eat that ice cream, but before you eat the ice cream, stop and be like, okay, what am I feeling? Acknowledge the feeling. That way, it's not an impulsive decision that you're making, right? When we're making these impulsive, we're just like these feelings are coming. We're going to CVS because they're open 24 hours. Because I've done that, and then we grab the ice cream. Like I've done that, right? And I'll do it consciously. Like I know what I'm doing. But before it was something that was not conscious. It was something that I just did to be doing. Hey Nathan. So remember that, right? So when you are dealing with emotions, it's important to acknowledge what you're dealing with and remind yourself that this is just a moment. This is not your entire life. That is so important to understand. Life is going to come with a lot of ups and downs, right? And I really wish, they've taught us about ABCs and one, two, threes, but they didn't teach us about emotions. And I really wish that we were taught this early on, because if we were taught about our emotions early on, as life started happening, because math and science and those things aren't going to help us deal with the roller coasters that life comes with, but having more emotional awareness will help us to do that, right? So one of the things I want to talk about is solutions, right? I'm a very solution oriented person. I don't just want to leave you with what's going on or why it's happening. I want to lead you and help you think about what you can do to manage these things, because we all are going through emotions because we're human, right? Like, I think that we have equated being strong with not crying, not being vulnerable, not acknowledging these emotions we don't want to not acknowledge. And I think that's wild when we're humans and we are full of emotions, right? So I really want you to think about some of the things you may have learned growing up about emotions and about expressing yourself, because sometimes that could be holding you back, right? Like, people don't realize that sometimes it's holding you back, some of the messaging that you've received growing up, right? If yes, acknowledgement is the first step to healing, 100%. And sometimes we don't realize when we were younger and we were getting ready to cry and we were told, like, what are you crying for? Like, what? Like, it's nothing wrong with you, right? Even if you got in trouble for something you've done wrong, right? Like, you can do something wrong as a child and be sad about it, but then if you're told, what are you crying for? You shouldn't be crying. Immediately, okay, let me ignore my emotions. Let me ignore what my body's telling me, right? If you are just sad, or maybe you're feeling down or anxious and you're overwhelmed as a child, and you find yourself like those messages that we received growing up, or even maybe not even seeing our caregivers shed a tear or show any emotion, right? Sometimes it was explicitly said to us not to cry, and sometimes we just noticed that our caregivers never showed emotion or vulnerability. They just kept going. They never stopped to pause. They never stopped to reflect. So all of these messages that we've received growing up has created a system where we've ignored what our body needs. Those emotions are there for a reason. I try not to use the word bad emotions, because it makes it seem like I want when you think about the emotions that you're feeling, I don't want it to be something where you're like, oh, this is bad. I want you to thank your body for being able to express it, because if you're walking around numb, you don't want to do that. Being numb is just not a way to operate in life, because you will not only not experience pain, you won't experience joy. And a lot of times we're trying to numb out the emotions because it feels so hard. And so maybe in the moment of numbing things, whether alcohol, food, drugs, relationships, in the moment you get that instant gratification where you don't feel, but the more that you start to try to numb one side of you, you're going to numb the other side. You're going to find yourself not being able to experience joy, especially when the addictions come into play, right? Anytime my first job in the mental health field was working with addictions and major mental health. And I've developed a huge passion for people that are struggling with addictions, because when I think about their addictions and how it started, they were trying to just numb their pain. Like, if you don't know what to do with it, of course you're going to run to numb it. But in the midst of it, unfortunately, you end up not experiencing joy either, right? And so one of the things, like Nathan said on YouTube, like acknowledging is the first step to healing. And so acknowledging pain is hard. Like, nobody want, I don't even want, like, I talk about this stuff, but I don't want to admit or acknowledge what I'm feeling. But I also know the benefits of being able to do that. I also know the benefits of being able to acknowledge the pain is that I'm not going to allow it to stay dormant in my life. There's a lot of people that are struggling with pain that has took place years ago, but because it was never dealt with, what's happening is literally ruining their life, right? It's literally taking over their life, something that they can never change, even if it was your fault or not your fault, something that you can never go back to allow something that can never change to ruin my present and my future is wild. But because we don't know any other way, it does feel like it's impossible, but I promise you it's possible. Someone says, is this how psychopaths work? The story of Dexter explains he is numb and able to do evil. He does because of trauma he faced as a child. Obviously, this is fictional, but there's truth to this. Yeah, I watched Dexter, and yeah, I know his story. And I think he used the killings of evil people to kind of he wanted to try to fix his childhood, but in the midst of it, you could tell he never had joy. Right. And so that was an addiction. If anybody's ever watched the show Dexter, he would kill bad guys and he was addicted to it. Like it was like this adrenaline rush. There's so many different addictions. We only talk about like drugs and alcohol, but there's sex. This guy on the fictional show killed bad people. Right. So he was so addicted to that he never got to experience joy. So I want to talk about the solutions, like, what is it that I can do to begin to work on like change, right? There's this feelings wheel that I always send to people at the when I work with them. Really beginning to acknowledge how you feel is really the first step. And I know TikTok, y'all can't see it. Sorry, because I can't share my screen on there. But for people that are listening, there's the main ones: surprised, bad, fearful, angry, disgusted, sad, happy. And then it fleshes out and it shows you so many other emotions. I want to name a few emotions that people that go through and struggle with admitting it: embarrassed, judgmental, jealous, violated, disrespected, excluded, worthless, overwhelmed, right? This emotion chart, if you go to feelingswheel.com or just Google feelings wheel, this emotion chart will come up. I always encourage people to keep it, screenshot it, put it somewhere so that they can have access to it and begin to actually look at and start acknowledging what they're feeling, especially if you're struggling with some kind of addiction where you know that you are struggling with this thing and you want to like slow down on it and you don't know how to slow down on it. Start with checking in how you're feeling before you do that, right? Like look at what am I feeling? And then after you say, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Sometimes the why doesn't come right away, but you can also check in with your body, asking yourself, like, where am I feeling it in my body? You'll be surprised. Like sometimes logic doesn't hit first. Sometimes you'll feel it in your body. Like I love somatic practitioners. I always talk about the body keeps the score and the importance of being in tune to your body, because the body will give you signs before you realize something's wrong. For me, it could be in my back or my hands. I could feel my hands sweaty. I talk to so many different people. Sometimes it's migraines for them. Sometimes their chest is beating, right? There's so many different signs that our body's giving us that we're not okay. And so if you can do that, that'd be great. For my parents, people that have kids, right? Because like, I never want to forget the kids. Like I only work with adults and I have kids. So, and I know kids are going through it. Teaching them about emotions as young as you can is a beautiful and important thing. This is just an example of a kid's feeling chart. Is very simple. If you Google kids feelings chart, you'll find a slew of them. And you could put it on the refrigerator. If they're struggling with some big emotions, you can grab this chart and ask them how they're feeling. Because you think you don't have language to talk about what you're dealing with. If you don't have language, imagine what your kids are feeling. Your kids are struggling with being able to acknowledge what they're feeling as well. So really be mindful of not just educating yourself around your emotion, but if you have children, bring them into the conversation too, because those are the tools, that the new clothes, the new sneakers, like all the gadgets, like that's not going to prepare them for life. The emotions and understanding their emotions are the thing that's going to be preparing them. So we acknowledge what we're feeling, access the source of the feeling, like, why am I feeling this, right? And if you start doing this daily, you'll be surprised. You'll start to realize, like, oh, I realize, like, when I talk to this coworker, they really stress me out because they're whatever. Or when my kid comes in this way, I realize I get riled up, right? But maybe it's because I'm triggered because it reminds me of my childhood. There are so many different ways that we are struggling, where if we were to just like pause and reflect, we won't get so worked up, right? A lot of people are getting so worked up unnecessarily. So once we access the source of our feelings, right? Why am I feeling it, or where am I feeling it? Be open about it, and be very non-judgmental. Like that, that's the biggest thing. Like, don't walk around judging yourself because of how you're feeling. That's important. um my ex, okay. Don't judge yourself for how you're feeling. Like, that's important, because if you're walking around judging yourself all the time, how are you going to get something done? If you always like, oh, like you feel you're jealous of this, or you, oh, that's why you're embarrassed, or whatever it is. Do not judge yourself. And that little voice in your head is not even your voice. It's the voice of all the things. And especially if you grew up where you had a caregiver that was always riding you and negative about everything you did or didn't do, that's that voice. If something happened and you never acknowledge it, that's that voice, right? So be mindful of that voice. You can even give it a name, right? Like, because the voice is going to come. You can't help it when it comes. But even though you can't help the voice that comes, you cannot entertain it. And that's the issue. We're allowing that voice to like have free reign in our mind and in our life. And it stops us from like moving forward. So instead, when it says like, oh, that's why you feel that way, it's like, this is a thank you for protecting me and letting me know that this is what I'm feeling, like I'm gonna be okay. Like literally, like you take your hand, put it over your heart, take a deep breath, and thank your body for being able to acknowledge the feeling, and then you give yourself what you need, right? But don't start judging yourself for what you're feeling, because feelings are a part of the human life cycle. I mean, yeah, emotions are a part of the human life cycle, right? So be mindful of that, is that when you're having a human emotion, that's normal. Like, we got to normalize it, right? Like, I think if you didn't grow up with normalizing emotions, it really feels hard and scary to do that, especially if it's not something that's happy or things like that. The last thing I want to say about this is like, let your emotions run its course. That's important to do. Where, you know, sometimes like I can acknowledge the emotion and I can be like, okay, like I'm good. Sometimes I acknowledge the emotion and the emotion is still there. So it's not that there's a quick fix to the emotions leaving your system. Sometimes it doesn't happen as quickly as you want it. But again, don't judge yourself for it. Be mindful of what's happening. And if this thing that you're trying to not do, you still do it, like at least you're not doing it impulsively. I'm all about harm reduction. Like the addictions that you are struggling with now happen for a reason. And a lot of people that are struggling with some kind of addiction really beat themselves up for it. But I think if you had the knowledge and education, like, you know, the reason why I end up starting coming on live, I started on YouTube years ago because I was working in the ER, and I seen a patient. And so when people go to the ER, they get medically cleared. And then when that's there and they think it's psych, they call me in. And so I went into the patient's room, and the patient was struggling with he thought he was having like a heart attack, like, so everything got cleared. And then I came in and I started asking him his story. And then come to find out, like, he struggled with anxiety, right? He didn't name it that, but then he started using alcohol. he came in sober for 1 month. He had been sober for 1 month, and now all these symptoms they feel like they're coming out of nowhere. And so I was like, yeah, those are not coming out of nowhere. They've always been there, but the alcohol helped you deal with them. It suppressed it, right? And so at the beginning, maybe he was doing it where it was very controllable and it didn't feel like it was an addiction, right? But then over time, over the 15 years, it turned into an addiction where he lost a lot of things and et cetera, et cetera. But when I explained to him what was happening with his chest and the anxiety symptoms and how they worked, oh my gosh, it was like a light bulb went off in his head. And he was like, yo, that makes sense. Like it just calmed his nerves so much. And so I met with him and I thought about it and I was like, dang, I really got to like share this knowledge with people because you know, what can end up happening with him is that these symptoms are coming back and he's probably like, you know what, let me just go back to the alcohol because I didn't feel this with the alcohol, but he didn't feel it. He didn't feel joy either. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, that's the hard part of trying to numb part of you. So in conclusion, I really want you to think about grabbing an emotion chart. You can literally Google it, make it your saver. I'm all about like when you hear something that works for you, don't just let it be something you listen to and you move away from it. Like really think about how can I be intentional on applying this to my life, right? And so if you have kids too, you can actually like print out that kid's emotion chart, put it on the fridge, put it in the room, in the bathroom, so that they can see it, so they can begin to acknowledge what they're feeling, because every parent wants their kid to be better than them, I hope, right? To not go through the same things they go through, I hope. And so if that's the case, like, why not give them a fighting chance by learning how to teach them about emotion? Hey, Kim, thank you. Need to control feelings to manage the eating habits better. Yes. Eating is one of the most diagnosed or under, I think eating is the most simplest things to become addicted to, because we have access to food all the time, right? We have access to food all the time. And so it's really important to recognize what you're feeling, because when I'm struggling, I want a cheeseburger, some chocolate cake. And so now I've learned so much about what I'm feeling, when I'm feeling it. I've cut back a lot, but years ago, I had that cheeseburger and chocolate cake, and it was a very impulsive decision. And then when I decided to pay attention to what I was feeling, that cut back a lot. I didn't judge myself. And if I decide to get the chocolate cake and cheeseburger, I don't judge myself. I'm very patient and kind with myself. But and that's what I need. You can't do this work without being patient and kind with yourself. I'm struggling now, ended up at Cafe for lunch. And then, so, you're struggling. So at least you're able to acknowledge it. And that's a good thing when we're able to acknowledge our emotions and that we're struggling. And sometimes we may go to that cafe, Kim, and we may get something that's not too bad either, right? Part two, what do we do with these feelings? Yes, that's a great idea, Sophia. To talk about. And if there's ever a subject you want me to talk about on a Wednesday, let me know. And I will definitely put it on the queue to talk about. Does anybody have any questions before we go? So every Wednesday, you can find me on streaming at 12 p.m. I'll be talking about a subject that we struggle with and ways to deal with it. And then I allow people to ask questions. My goal in doing this is because, one, like, trying to get mental health support is really challenging. And sometimes there's a monetary value attached to it that we don't all have, right? And I feel like as rich as this country is, and we have these curriculums, like, why was it never built into the system? I always say that it's not by accident that we're not taught these things. Like, and it's like you think about ABCs to read, right? You can't read without knowing your alphabets, right? I think about emotions is like how you live life, right? numbers, math, science, we can survive, we can get a good job, you know what I mean? We can climb the totem pole. But emotions really allow us to learn how to live life because there's so many challenges in life. And if we're making time to be still and pay attention to what we're feeling, like, oh my gosh, life would look different. I'm not saying life gets perfect. Believe me, it doesn't get perfect, but it doesn't feel like it's consuming you. I'm struggling with my divorce so hard. And one of the things, when you're like a divorce, or even if you, let's say as a parent, you're no longer talking to a friend, one thing that's important to think about is grieving. We only talk about grieving when we lose people on earth, but there are situations that we grieve. Divorce, it's a grieving thing. And if you understand there's an emotional roller coaster that comes. Nobody gets married to get divorced. Like, that's not, unless you're doing one of those arranged marriages for money. But if you really getting married to get married, you wasn't expecting to get divorced. So I think one of the things as you're struggling with the divorce is to think about, like, okay, I'm grieving, so you can have compassion for yourself. Because even I've worked with people that are in have gone through divorce, and it's such an emotional roller coaster because of how you feel about the person, and then like the feelings go back and forth. Why do I care? Or, you have all of these emotions. Again, tap into that emotion and really don't judge yourself for how you're feeling, because I think that's really gets in the way of us moving forward, is that we become so judgmental with ourselves and how we're feeling. And so I always tell people, remember, you're human, you're having a human experience. And also in the midst of your grieving, reminding yourself that this is a moment you're experiencing. This is not your entire life. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. You are welcome. Thank you. All right, y'all. So thank you so much. I appreciate the love. I appreciate you guys checking in with me. You can find my website at CelestaTherapist.com if you want to learn more about me, and you can follow me everywhere on all social media platforms by searching Celesta Therapist. All right. Thank you.